Council, and we're going to talk today about building a purpose-driven culture, something that I am passionate about and have had the good fortune of being able to practice both at Seventh Generation for about 20 years, and it sustained the company that I started with my daughter 5 years ago. Because we have so many people on this webinar, we can't unfortunately have a conversation. So you'll be stuck with hearing me present for the next hour or so. And happy to get feedback by email and answer any questions that you weren't able to ask during the webinar after we're done. Successful purpose-driven brands build strong and deep corporate cultures. Those cultures must be systemically and holistically aligned with the business's mission, vision, and values. Purpose-based cultures impact and influence all aspects of a business and must be invented and reinvented as a business grows and evolves. So what is corporate culture? We're going to talk about that today. Corporate cultures expressing values aren't for the faint of heart. Early on in our development of Seventh Generation, we had a fascinating challenge and a challenge to our culture and the values that we're committed to when we finally got distribution of Seventh Generation products at Albertsons stores. And lo and behold, a couple weeks after we got our products on their shelves, there was a labor strike at Albertsons because Albertsons was trying to reduce the healthcare benefits that they provide to their workers. And you could say, well, what does that have to do with us? We're just selling them toilet paper and laundry detergent. But because we were a company that paid for 100% of the healthcare of our employees, we believed that other companies should do the same things. And so our staff raised the question, should we do business with a company that didn't have the same values as we had and was actively trying to reduce those benefits for their own employees? And we had a big discussion at the company at an all-hands meeting, and we basically had two groups of people. We had a group of people that said that we should absolutely keep the products on the shelves of Albertsons because our business was to provide healthier, safer products for our consumers, customers. And another group of people that said, we don't want to make money with business partners who have such different values for their business than we do, because by doing business with Albertsons, we're in fact supporting a company that is not treating its workers as we would hope to treat our workers, or we think business in general should treat its workers. And we had a big debate and we had discussion, and it went on for weeks, and it tested our values. It tested the culture that we had created and how we expressed those values. And fortunately, we had someone far smarter than me at the company who made a brilliant suggestion. And the suggestion was, why don't we take all of the profits from the sales at Albertsons and contribute those profits to the workers' strike fund so that we could help the workers hold the strike as long as possible in the hope that they would win, while at the same time not disappointing our consumers and continuing to make our products available to them. And that's an example of the challenges that come with creating a purpose-based culture where you're trying to ensure you express that purpose and those values in all aspects of the way in which you do business. So corporate culture represents the heart and soul of a business. It's complicated, it's ever-changing, and it must be systemic and holistic. What does that mean? That's what we're going to cover in this seminar and talk about more specifically. First, I want to give you a sense of all the ways in which corporate culture is expressed in a business. Obviously, corporate culture is derived from the mission and vision that the company has. Most companies today have operating principles, and corporate culture is driven by those operating principles. We're going to talk about something that we developed at Seventh Generation called global imperatives, which are a little different than mission and vision. And of course, your culture is very much dictated and either supported or hurt by the people you hire and how you hire them, the job descriptions they have, the way in which you do performance reviews, the way in which you have your incentive structure designed, the design of your office, the kinds of programs you use to grow and develop your staff, the way your management behaves, the way in which you design the ownership for your culture, the traditions you have, the ways in which people tell stories about you. One of the things that is so daunting in some respects are all of the ways that your activities as a business reflect that culture. And so we're going to dive into each of these if we have time, and even more on this second page. Even things like your human resource handbook, the way in which you communicate your financial results, the food that's available, the retreats you have, the way you manage bad news, all of those things have a tremendous amount to do with your culture. I want to start by just looking at some of the global imperatives that Seventh Generation has. And we developed those global imperatives with a wonderful woman named Carol Sanford. And we developed those global imperatives by asking a question: what does the world most need that we are uniquely able to provide? And we probably spent 6 months developing these 7 global imperatives that inform our culture and inform the way in which we do business. So I want to read these quickly because they are so important to our company in terms of what it is and what it became. Number 1, as a business, we are committed to being educators and to encourage those we educate to create with us a world of equity and justice, health and well-being. This was a really big change point because we started off as a very much environmentally focused company. And when we thought about what we need to provide and what kind of company we need to have, we realized that we can't separate issues of equity and justice, health and well-being from the environment and from sustainability. Sustainability was deeply associated and connected to issues of equity and justice. And this also talked about us as educators. We are very, very much committed and focused to educating our stakeholders in the things that matter to us. Number 2, to create a world of more conscious workers, citizens, and consumers. And if you're interested, I wrote a book some years ago called Seventh Generation's Guide to Corporate Consciousness. And it really talked about how we built a more conscious workplace. We are committed to creating a world that is rich in value as contrasted to a world that is rich in artifacts. And I consider toilet paper and laundry detergent artifacts. And this was one of the most challenging global imperatives that we had. We worked hard, but really didn't succeed as a company in moving away from these artifacts. And I know today the company is still thinking about and working on some of these issues. We will work to create governance and social systems that increase the capacity for understanding different perspectives and points of view. And that led us to get involved with the American Sustainable Business Council and led me to become the CEO of the American Sustainable Business Council. We believe that our businesses and all businesses should engage in personal development of everyone who works for them. We believed that to grow our company, we had to grow the people at our company, that we couldn't grow the business unless we grew and developed our own staff. And that was also challenging because when we were growing quickly, we had a real tendency to hire people from other companies who appeared to have more experience than we had. And we hired lots and lots of people from lots of big consumer products companies. And in some ways, that really challenged our culture because rather than investing in and developing our own staff, all of the new people we hired who had very different values than some of the original seventh generation employees challenged that culture. And one of our learnings was invest in our own staff before we hire talent and acquire that talent from outside the company. Just three more and I'll move on quickly. We are committed to approaching everything we do from a systems perspective. We deeply believe in systems thinking. Systems thinking is critical to the culture, and we tried to teach systems thinking to our entire staff. The last two, we must ensure that globally natural resources are used and renewed at a rate that is always below their rate of depletion, a critical concept when it comes to regenerative, sustainable businesses. And the last one is that we are committed to creating a business which is not just sustainable, but restorative. So let me next move to operating principles. And again, these operating principles are important, and it's critical that you choose operating principles that are really unique to your culture. Don't have an operating principle that says, be honest. Don't have an operating principle that says, don't steal from the business. Choose operating principles that are really unique to you and unique to the character and purpose of your company. So we chose work consciously, celebrate, be radically transparent, take on the system, and make a difference. These, again, were ones that appealed to us and our culture, and you have to develop the operating principles that are unique to you and express your own values and your own commitments. We touched on this a little earlier, and of course, it's critical who you hire and how you hire them. One of the things that was really important was the interview team. And when I think about some of the biggest mistakes we made as a company, it was often when I went out and hired someone myself without using that interview team. The interview team should be made up of people from different levels of the company and different departments. You need, again, to reflect the whole of the organization when you interview a new individual who you're considering hiring. That perspective can't come from just the human resource department. It can't come from a single manager. It needs to come from a diverse group of people who represent the whole of your company. We hired for values rather than skills. The values of an individual were more important than the skills represented on their resume. How do you tell what someone's values are? You have to ask the right questions. One of the questions we ask is, what are you most proud of? And we found that we got two different types of answers. One answer was, I'm proud of what I did creating X, Y, or Z. The other answer we got was, I'm really proud of what my team accomplished. We would almost always hire the people who were proud of what their team did rather than what they accomplished as individuals. Again, because we wanted to create a culture where people were more focused on those around them than the individual accomplishments that they made themselves. We wanted to hire inquisitive people. we would ask them what they were reading, what they were watching, what they were studying. And if they weren't showing curiosity and diversity in what they were exposing themselves to, we were less inclined to hire them. And references were always important, but the most important references are never the references that appear on someone's resume. The references that you want are the references that they don't offer to you. So we would go on LinkedIn, or we would find someone who had worked with them and who was willing to speak freely about that experience. And usually it's former employees who worked with them but weren't any longer at the company. And we got the best insight into those people from those individuals. And sometimes you have to ask questions like, how can I best manage this individual to help ensure that they are as effective and productive as possible? And I would get great advice that would help if I hired that person by asking a question of that sort. Job descriptions are also important, particularly at smaller, younger organizations. We often get sloppy and don't create them, but I think they're critical, and they're a critical part of your culture. Operating principles belong in those job descriptions. At Seventh Generation, everyone had a responsibility for sustainability. That was in your job description. It wasn't delegated to the director of sustainability or the sustainability department. It's also really important to outline what responsibilities someone was going to have, as well as the skills that are required for the job. It's also really important in this hiring process that we talked about, and we'll get into this a little more when we talk about transparency. We talked about what was going wrong, where we were falling short. We didn't want to hire someone into our company and have them discover things that they found disappointing. We always wanted them to come into Seventh Generation and in fact be excited and pleased that things were better than we led them to believe, rather than worse. Performance reviews, again, are important in creating a culture. Every 90 days, and certainly once a year, you should check in with your staff and see if the objectives you set forth, and everyone needs objectives. Everyone needs to have clear, measurable objectives, and you need to then have a conversation with them about how they're doing against those objectives. Some companies do 360-degree reviews. I like them, not everyone does. We also have developmental goals. And what is a developmental goal? Let me give you an example of a developmental goal, and I'll use myself as an example. I, if you haven't already noticed, like to talk, and I talk a lot. And when I would go into a meeting, I would often dominate that meeting by answering lots of questions, always having an answer. And what I realized was that I was actually doing the company a disservice. By always being the one to dominate the conversation and always being the one to have answers, I wasn't finding out what other people could contribute. I was actually depriving them of contributing. And so I put a Post-it note on my computer, and my developmental objective was to ask more questions and to provide less answers. And everyone at Seventh Generation had those developmental goals. And those developmental goals were just as important as a sales manager meeting their sales goal, or someone in the purchasing department reducing costs of their supply chain responsibilities. Another thing that expresses corporate culture is the way in which you design your incentive structure. And you have to think about your culture and think about that. Should everyone get an individual bonus based upon their individual performance? Or should all bonuses be granted based upon the overall company performance and everyone sinks or swims together? There's lots of arguments for doing it a variety of different ways, but the key here is to say, what does the incentive structure that we've designed tell us about the kind of culture that we have, and is it expressing our values? One of the more obvious parts of a company culture is office design. And things that were important to us was access to natural light, because we thought that better light and natural light improve people's performance. Great air quality. We built a LEED qualified office, and that ensured that we had good systems to provide healthy air. Do you want people in closed offices or an open office design? We used to have a culture where in our open office design, someone would put on a silly hat if they didn't want anyone to talk to them. And again, that was a great tool to make sure that people weren't interrupted. And it also expressed the kind of fun way that people could communicate their own character and their own interests. So think about the way you design your office. It tells a lot and expresses a lot about your corporate culture. We talked a little bit about developmental programs before, and the idea that to grow a business, you need to grow the people there. Not everyone agrees with that. We had people at Seventh Generation who, in fact, didn't want to participate in this developmental process, who said, look, I came here to be an accountant, and that's what I understood I was supposed to do. Why do I now have to reflect on where I need to grow as an individual? But everybody needs to grow. And again, you have to have a leadership team that really embodies that. Everyone needs a coach. We need to provide external resources to people so that they can have that coaching, or at least internal resources so that people coach each other. One of the biggest challenges you have in building this type of developmental culture is your senior management team. Often people who are senior managers have great experience and they've been very successful at other companies, but that doesn't mean that that experience and that learning will translate into success in your culture. Too many very successful people think they don't have anything left to learn. They're very focused on business, but just business. But if you have that type of culture where the leaders and the senior managers don't embody those qualities that are critical to your culture, like being humble. I mean, we valued humbleness. We valued people who were open, who were willing to share their mistakes and talk openly about their mistakes. And often that's really hard for senior managers to do. They think that because they're senior, they shouldn't be making mistakes. They think because they're senior, they're too good or too knowledgeable to make mistakes. And it's really critical that the senior management, and particularly the leadership and the CEO, model the values that the company has. I've seen many, many places where the company has great values up on their wall. And when you meet the senior management of the team, you would think that those values apply to a totally different company because the senior management doesn't model those values. Ownership is also really, really critical. At Seventh Generation, I strongly believed that if we were going to create the kind of culture that I talked about in our global imperatives, we needed to have owners, not employees. And for every year that the company was a private company before we were sold to Unilever, the first day that someone started working at Seventh Generation, they received a grant of options that would make them an owner in the company. And my goal was to try to get to 30% ownership that would allow us to be an ESOP. And if you're nervous about giving options and actual stock in your company, there are all kinds of tools like phantom stock that allows someone to get the benefits of ownership every way in which they would normally benefit, but would not be able to vote as an owner. That's the only negative of something like phantom stock. Giving out shares in your company does come with challenges because you're effectively diluting the ownership of your outside investors. And again, it puts pressure on your performance because you basically have to show that because you have a company of owners rather than a company of employees, your company actually performs better. And there have been lots of interesting studies covering companies that are co-ops or ESOPs, and it actually shows very clearly that companies where there is ownership and democratic participation in management, that those companies perform better financially than other companies. Tradition is also critical. What kind of tradition do you want to create at your company? And it is really something that is very personal and very individual to different companies. I remember at Seventh Generation, Halloween was one of the highlights of our company, that you would be blown away by the outfits and costumes that people came with. Of course, Earth Day and now Earth Month was a big part of what we celebrated. We always had a Thanksgiving meal together at lunchtime, a couple of days before Thanksgiving. You can even make up your own holidays. We also did for many, many, many years, and it was one of my favorite parts of the company, a retreat where you would take the entire staff away for 2 days and an evening. And that retreat was really an amazing opportunity to meet staff members that you didn't always often come into contact with, and to really build a sense of community in a way that was hard to do in the midst of the day-to-day business that was done at the office. We also had monthly company-wide meetings. And in those company-wide meetings, we always had a policy that you could ask the senior management or the CEO any question at all. Even if it was awkward, even if it was embarrassing, as long as it was done in a respectful fashion, you could ask any question. And we made the individuals who asked the most difficult questions really heroes within our culture. We wanted to really show great respect for the courage that those individuals express. Now, if you had a culture where someone asked a difficult question and the CEO was obstinate or showed his or her displeasure about being asked such an impractical or awkward question, that would have a big effect on your culture. You would basically be communicating, hey, ask me anything as long as I'm proud of the situation and comfortable answering the question. That wasn't the type of culture we wanted to create. We wanted to create a culture of transparency and honesty, and thus we had to really honor the people who asked those difficult, challenging questions. One of the things that was really fun that we did was we sort of realized that we had all of these employees who were in many ways the greatest advocates and ambassadors that we could have for our company, but we never equipped them to really tell the company's story. And if they were in an elevator and they had 60 seconds and someone asked them what they did, often they didn't know how to answer that question in a compelling, exciting fashion. So we actually hired a storyteller and spent several hours teaching our staff to tell stories and to tell the story of seventh generation and to equip all of our staff to tell that compelling, exciting story about the company so that people would remember seventh generation and be curious and find out more about what we were up to. And of course, one of the things that I'm the most proud of is that seventh generation was known as a company that is radically transparent. And companies don't know often how to do that. Companies behave, I often tell the story of, imagine going out on a date with someone and all they did was tell you how wonderful they were, how smart they were, how successful they were, how they did such amazing things. Most people would never want to go out with them again. But that's how companies behave. They can't talk about what they're doing wrong. They only can talk about the good, but not the bad or the ugly. And I sort of like to think about transparency as, instead of putting all the good stuff on the outside, put the truth on the outside and put inside the onion some of the wonderful things so that as someone peels back that onion, what they get is more and more positive, compelling information about the company, and that they don't get misled by just having all that good information on the outside. Because sooner or later, they'll discover what we're doing wrong, where we've fallen short. When I would participate in writing our annual sustainability report, I often thought that if it didn't almost give our lawyers a heart attack, we weren't being transparent enough. And it really is, I think, humbleness and radical transparency that did more to build trust and authenticity in the brand than anything else we did. So, this is something that is not surprising, that you obviously have to walk the talk. You have to be the change you wish to see. And so we struggled with our global imperatives to think about the ways in which we could express them in our business. And we did several things that were really a direct result of our global imperatives and fundamentally changed the way we did business. And one example is a program called Change It that we developed with Greenpeace. We said that we wanted to be educators and we wanted to educate those stakeholders and shareholders and customers that we do business with. And so we used to run and still do promotions in retail stores. And you go into a retail store and you see that you can win a trip to NASCAR, you can win something from the company. And we thought, well, that's not really very educational. And so we decided to create this program called Change It, where what you would win is a trip to Washington, D.C. to learn how to become an environmental activist from a team of the Greenpeace staff. And it was amazing how excited people were about winning this trip to Washington to learn how to be an environmental activist. And one of the things that we found was that those experiences stayed with people for their entire life. Those experiences were truly transformative and basically built an incredible cadre of not just loyal customers, but customers that were passionate and amazing ambassadors for the brand, because they couldn't believe that seventh generation was investing in their ability to go out and create environmental change. We also think about the challenge of equity and justice, and how does a company that sells products that are often more expensive than their traditional counterparts and inaccessible to low-income individuals, how do we actually embed that notion of justice and equity as a company? And one of the things that we did that we were really, really excited about was we had a partnership with an organization in San Francisco called Wages. And Wages had built cooperative businesses that were run and owned by low-income Hispanic women. And we, and largely, I remember our chief scientist, Martin Wolf, spent many, many hours and lots of time working with these women. But what we did was, first of all, we gave them our products at cost. So instead of them cleaning with toxic cleaners, they would clean with seventh generation products. And it was amazing to see the way their health would improve because they were using non-toxic cleaning products. So that was one really exciting accomplishment, was improving the health of the women who were working at these cooperatives. But we also got back a tremendous amount of value from these relationships, because we would hear all the ways in which our products didn't work as well as they should work. And this was really valuable insight from people who were doing cleaning every day, and was very helpful from a product development perspective. So those were some of the ways, and there are many, that we expressed our global imperatives through our business. Another part of our culture that was really important was how we handled bad news. And one of the things that was critical to us was that we wanted to make sure that our staff always heard bad news before anyone else does. Companies are filled with rumors, and rumors are terrible things. If something was happening that would concern our staff, we wanted to make sure they heard it directly from our senior management team or myself. You don't want to sugarcoat the bad news. You never want to create unnecessary fear and insecurity, but you need to be the bearer of that bad news first before they hear it from anyone else. Community participation. Lots of times and lots of companies have great programs where they go out and work with local nonprofits or do work in their local community. And that's really important. It's a critical way to connect with your local community. And it's a significant investment of time and energy. And I always thought it was really an important way in which seventh generation expressed who it was in our community. Now, we had a lot of communities, and that was complicated because we sold our products all over the country, even though we were located in Burlington. So we had a Vermont community, we had a Burlington community, we were part of the natural products industry in that community. So we had lots of communities, and we had to be selective about where we participated, and usually we chose to communicate our participation in the local Vermont community. So this is a subject that most people don't find so exciting unless you're working in the human resource department. But I think the human resource handbook is a critical way in which companies communicate their values and influence their cultures. Yes, it's a legal document, and you have to have your lawyers review it, and you have to make sure that it follows all the legal requirements of the human resource handbook. But it's also an opportunity for you to tell your story to a new employee, to talk about your operating principles, to talk about your values, to talk about why you started the company, to make sure that this handbook is a critical part of the orientation process that new employees go through. And of course, the orientation process is another really important way to communicate your culture. How do you orient that new employee? How do you help that new employee understand what's unique about your company, what's unique about your values? And how do they succeed in that culture? What are they invited to do that might be different from other companies in which they have worked? Sometimes I think that most business cultures damage individuals. They damage their spirit. They damage their natural inclination to be honest and open. And especially when you're hiring someone who has had a negative work environment in which they've been in, it's a real challenge to help them understand the opportunity they have working in your culture and at your company. And I've often seen it take 1, 2, or even 3 years for someone to really adjust to how different a culture a progressive, transparent, authentic company is, because at first they don't trust it. They've had the experience of tell me what you really think, and then being whacked because they said something that someone didn't want to hear. Building up that kind of trust takes time, and it's why it's so important, as I said earlier, that you have great recognition, respect, and support for those employees that are modeling that type of behavior. We talked about this a little before in terms of at-will employment, so I won't go into that again. Reviewing financial results, again, are really important. I always thought it was really important for companies to know how we were doing on a monthly, but certainly a quarterly basis. If the company is experiencing financial stress, it affects the way your culture operates, it affects the way the management operate, and people have to understand and be able to connect the dots between the challenges you're experiencing financially and the decisions that you make as the way you run your company. People need to understand how they can individually affect those financial results and what they can do to make a positive contribution to financial success. But not sharing financial results is almost like driving without a map. You need that map, and you need the map of the balance sheet as well as the P&L. Some people just focus on the P&L. And the balance sheet, in many cases, tells an equally, if not more important story. How much cash do you have? What are your liabilities? Are they growing? Are they declining? What's happening with accounts receivable? Those issues that are expressed on the balance sheet are a critical measure of the health of the business. And I understand that a lot of managers and CEOs feel afraid to share that information with their employees. But it is incredibly empowering. It avoids people's fears and rumors. No need to disclose individual compensation, in my opinion, but everything else about the finances of the company are critically important. Sustainability reporting. More and more companies are doing it. It's a lot of work. I think Seventh Generation does an amazing job with its sustainability reporting. It's quite heartening to read their sustainability report and see their willingness to disclose metrics, even if they're moving in the wrong direction. Unilever has set a great example as a parent company, having a sustainability report where they're honest about where they've fallen short, where they're honest about the goals they've set that they haven't met. And again, part of the challenge we have, and it's again a cultural issue, is most companies only want to set goals that they already know how to meet. They are so fearful of not meeting goals that they're so conservative about setting them already having figured out how to meet them. That does not create innovation. That doesn't create new possibilities and challenging environments. So I think that in setting goals from a sustainability perspective, you should be courageous enough to set goals that you don't know how to meet. Who do you belong to? Really, really important. Memberships say a lot about your company. Are you a B corporation? B corporations are really, really, in my opinion, the sort of leading edge of what responsible businesses should be. And there's a wonderfully rigorous process that you go through to become a B corporation. And I would say the same with the American Sustainable Business Council. One of the things that I reflected on at my time at Seventh Generation, and of course I'm still involved as a board member, but I don't work there and I don't participate in the day-to-day operations. One of the things that I reflected on is that Seventh Generation, as is Ben & Jerry's and Stonyfield and Patagonia, they're all wonderful exceptions to the rules that govern the way most companies run. But if we're going to stop climate change, well, we can't stop it, but if we can slow it, we'll be doing a good job. If we want to deal with the incredible economic inequality we have to change the rules. A handful of companies, even thousands of companies doing things differently will make the lives of their employees better. But if we really want to change the entire landscape, we have to do it together. And by being part of the American Sustainable Business Council, it's probably the most important way in which you can work to change the policies that affect all companies, that level the playing field. And it's a really important way in which our community of responsible, sustainable, progressive businesses can come together to work for the same objectives, to work together, not just on the issues that matter most to you, but on the issues that matter to our planet, on the issues that matter to our society. And those positive changes will only come about by working together. So, I could talk about food, but we're almost out of time. And I really apologize that we couldn't have a dialogue here, because a dialogue is really the best way in which to have these conversations. But hopefully you can follow up with emails to me that I can respond to. My email address is Jeffrey, Jeffrey, at asbcouncil.org. And I'm happy to continue this conversation with you. I'm happy to share other ideas and hopefully answer some of your questions. And I hope that if you're not already a member of ASBC, you'll consider joining. It's something that I am really proud to do. I read a wonderful book called Winners Take All that I highly, highly recommend. And it helped me really understand that we need to work on public policy that change the political and social and economic landscape of our country, and we can only do that by working together. So thank you very much. I hope this was helpful. I'm sorry it was a monologue rather than a dialogue. Look on the ASBC website for more upcoming webinars. We're doing webinars on, let's see, we're doing a webinar coming up on systems thinking for business, which should be really exciting. We're doing a webinar on opportunity zones and how you can participate in them. So check out our website and you'll see upcoming events that I think you'll find quite interesting. Thanks everybody and have a great day. I wasn't happy with that, but I hope it was okay.
It was great. It was great. I don't know why it started late.
Well,
it was great. I loved it. I wish I could hear it all day long.
Kathleen couldn't figure out how to help me set up the webinar.
I hear you. Jeffrey, I'm so sorry, but I have to call Thomas now to get on this call with Method.
I'll talk to you later. I'll talk to you later.
I'll see